button up. Still tuned to WBS 89.7 FM, South Bend, Indiana. It's a gorgeous day in the city. Skies are blue, roadways are clear. A little brisk outside, but that's all right. Just take your time, you'll do fine. Special guest here in Studio A. Call a friend, tell them to tune it in. Be right back. That's the New York Minute. We're back. Let's wind that thing right down, get into our conversation. Listen, we have a special guest here today, and I trust that you'll call a friend, tell them to tune it in, because you're going to get some valuable information. Not only that, you're going to get some correct information, and that's what makes the difference. We've got Miss Karen DePaepe with us today, and she is a historic figure in our city. And if you don't know that name by now, where have you been? Because her name is synonymous with the wire tape situation and Daryl Boykins in the city of South Bend, and under the leadership of Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So want to just say a little bit about Karen DePaepe, and that is that she is a person of character. We've sit here and talked. She's a person with commitment, and she's a person with courage. Those three things that I've learned about her over the years. I want to say a special thanks to Mario Sims for helping to set this event in motion, and appreciate you, Rev, for all that you do. Know that many of you are listening out in the community, both city officials, police officers, educators, pastors, and WBS radio sponsors, and this is an exclusive interview that you won't get anywhere else, and we're going to pull the cover off and let you know the truth. Miss Karen DePaepe, how are you doing today?
Thank you, Reverend. I'm doing well.
All right. I want you to just scoot right and talk directly in that mic, because people got to hear what you have to say. The reason that I particularly wanted to talk to you today, because I want to know how you doing. I hear all about how the tape's doing, but I don't know nothing about how you doing. So tell us a little bit, after 2012, when this whole thing came to surface, how you been?
Well, I'm doing well as a person. It disturbs me when I see articles in the paper almost constantly over something that occurred several years ago and still has not been completed or dealt with. And it's just like, how long will this drag out? We've had world wars that didn't take as long as to make a decision what should be done with the tapes and whether they should be released or not released. So that's been difficult. I would have thought by now a decision would have been made one way or the other. I read things that I know aren't completely factual, and part of me wants to step out and refute that. Mm-hmm. But the better part of me says, no, it's, people are going to hear a variety of things, and it's up to them to take all of the information and figure out for themselves what is credible and what is not. So, I
want to just let listeners know, while you're listening to our interview, you can view it as well on WBSradio.com. So if you call that up on your cell phone, desktop, laptop, you can view. If you've never seen Miss DePaepe before, you can see her in living color. And she certainly has a smile that is magnetic.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that. Let me just ask in terms of, let me just say thank you for your service, number one, because you spent 25 years.
Thank you.
As in policing and communication and so forth, dispatch, and that should be, what led you into that field?
Well, actually, it was my brother. My brother's a retired police officer, and back in 1986, they were having difficulty finding people to become dispatchers that they felt had the ability to do the job. It needed a lot of multitasking skills to do that job. And at the time, I was working for the Humane Society of St. Joe County, and some changes had taken place where we really didn't have, they found as a nonprofit, they didn't have to pay into Social Security and things like that. I didn't see, even though I enjoyed my job, I didn't see an opportunity to grow farther or to even create some sort of a retirement for myself. At that time, I was like 27, so you wouldn't think I'd be thinking about retirement, but I was single at the time and the only one making my way in the world. So my brother actually had said to me, hey, they're looking for civilianizing the entire communications center. Why don't you apply? And so it wasn't like I necessarily was looking for that as a career. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what does a dispatcher do? I had no clue. And he said, well, basically, you just answer the phone. And that was his idea of pretty much what a dispatcher did.
Luring you in.
Yes. And so I applied and was selected along with 3 other people. And so we were part of a group of 4 that were hired. And when I got in there, I was like, oh my goodness, this is nothing like I thought it would be. And it was stressful, but it was rewarding in a sense because you felt like you were helping people. It, had its good perks, and it had things about the job that could be upsetting, especially if you were somebody like myself that kind of always never dealt with tragedy in the world. I kind of wasn't subjected to people that were shot or stabbed or, rapes or things like that. And so now all of a sudden that's very real to me. Mm-hmm. And so it was eye-opening and at times depressing.
And 25 years later, that's your commitment. Your commitment, you love what you did. You served under how many chiefs?
5.
5 chiefs.
Yes.
And then comes Daryl Boykins.
Yeah, well, he was the 5th.
And he was the 5th. So when Daryl Boykins became chief, what was the atmosphere like? Was people glad to see him be appointed as chief? He'd been captain and so forth like that. Do you think that people welcome him as a chief?
I thought so. I thought he was very well respected, and that I'm sure there were people that didn't have that opinion that, felt, oh, so-and-so should have gotten it or something like that. But the culture had always been that it's the mayor's decision it's an appointed position. So when he was appointed, I certainly did just like I did with the other chiefs. My job's to serve you and to do a good job and do what you ask of me. And he was what I considered more than fair with people.
And he was appointed under Mayor Lickey.
Correct.
Not under Buttigieg.
Correct.
Let's get to the time that you discovered the tapes. Mm-hmm. Part of your job as director of communication is to oversee communication systems.
Correct.
So how is it that you ran across something that disturbed you? That caused your morality to be challenged and your commitment to the city of South Bend to be awakened?
Well, we had been having problems with our what was a dynamic instruments recording system. And it was a few years old, and we had to have some parts replaced on it. And after the parts, one was a backup DVD drive. After parts were replaced, it started to malfunction. And this was happening just periodically. When the machine would malfunction, an alarm would go off, and it would tell you, hey, something's not right here. Well, we had actually 3 DVD recorders swapped out of the machine, and our company that we dealt with was out of Ohio. And so I would talk to them, and we had an IT person on hand that would swap these DVDs out for us. And I was becoming frustrated because the problem wasn't being dealt with. It would work for like a week and then it would start malfunctioning again. And when I say malfunctioning, the system was two parts. The first part was it would hold things on a hard drive. But the hard drive could only hold so much data, so much information. Mm-hmm. So periodically it would take information and it would download it to a DVD drive. And that's where I found problems were happening. It wasn't downloading all of the information. Some, not all. Sometimes it didn't download anything. And it was just very frustrating for me because as the keeper of the records, sometimes things wouldn't come up for court for 2-3 years. So, I had to keep notes as we lost this data on the backup drive. I don't have this week's worth of information. So if there had been a robbery or a murder or something, that information might not be there. Mm-hmm. So very important to me that...
Very technical.
Yes, that it worked correctly. Mm-hmm. And I contacted the company and wasn't very nice about it. I was like, look, we pay for service. You need to come here and you need to fix this. This needs to be fixed. I can't have it breaking down constantly. So I spoke to the technician and he said, well, before I come there, do me a favor. I want you to listen to every channel, which would be every radio channel or phone that we recorded on not only the drive itself, but on the backup drive. I want to know if it's downloading information or is it missing on certain channels? He was trying to technically look at what... Troubleshooting, right. And so I said, oh, okay, I will. And so as I started going through, and it's like, okay, that downloaded, and I had a list of every phone line that we were recording at the time. And I came across this one phone line, and I heard somebody talking on it, and it wasn't, to my knowledge, their phone in their office. So I thought, oh my gosh, how is this happening? Now it's recording somebody that's not even on the recording system. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it was in my head. So I heard something very disturbing that I felt was not ethical behavior. But I thought to myself at the time, I kind of chuckled. I thought, well, if I was going to make a phone call like that, I wouldn't do it on my line either. So I thought, maybe this person is using somebody else's phone. And so I thought, well, I better go back. So I started backdating and checking to see. And it's like, okay, this person's still talking on this line a week later and a week after that. So now I'm trying to figure out, when did this happen? When did this person all of a sudden have their line recorded that hadn't been recorded because we had not made any changes to the system? And that's when I heard a conversation that dealt with the chief of police, and it was very disturbing about a plan pertaining to him. And
did you say a plan?
Yes, what I considered a plan that was being put in place. And I struggled with, because some of the people that were being discussed were people that he had promoted and people that he regarded as friends. So that really put me in a predicament. I certainly don't want to say something if I'm not 100% correct, but I also don't know whether he would want this line recorded or what needs to be done. So I was actually, as you say, I'm brave. I was cowardly. I waited 3-4 weeks and stewed about whether I should tell him what I heard or not, because I knew it was going to open up a huge can of worms. And it was like, do I want to be in the middle of that? Do I really want to get drugged through that? And so it got to the point I couldn't even sleep at night. It was disturbing me to think, do I tell him or don't I tell him? Or am I to be evasive and just say, hey, I discovered this, but not tell him what I heard? Those were the thoughts going through my head at the time. How do I handle this? Do I put myself out there, or do I just, completely act like I didn't hear anything? Well, when it starts to disturb your sleep, you start to realize, there's something grating at me, saying
you're being guided by your moral compass.
Right. I guess that's how you would put it.
Your moral compass.
And I had a great level of respect for Chief Boykins. He had always been, in my mind, at least when I dealt with him, very fair. And so I thought, well, I guess I'm going to have to discuss it with him. So I called him and I said, I need to talk to you about something that's very confidential. And he said, okay. He said, I'll come down to your office. So he came down to my office. And when I told him what I heard, it was like he was in shock. It's like he almost couldn't believe what I had said. And I then asked him, well, what do you want done? You know, what changes do you want? What do you want from me? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, I don't know. I guess I'll get back to you. And so I, at that point, you know, thought, well, maybe he doesn't
Did
believe
you feel relieved after you had told him? Did any of that weight leave?
Not really. I felt like I hurt him. That by telling him what I heard actually hurt him. He, you know, to me it was clear deception. And I could see in his face he was hurt. You know, that it was somebody that had said something that he cared about. Somebody that he considered a friend. And so that made me feel bad. And I didn't want to put him in that position where, believe me over your friend. You know, and at that time he didn't even ask to review it. It was just like he was in shock. So I let it go. I let it in his hands and said, let me know if you want any changes. That's how I put it.
What kind of changes would you have in mind?
Well, in my mind, do you want that line removed? Do you want an investigation of how that happened? You know, how did this line get mixed up or what have you? And I said, you know, just let me know. I was probably vague about it. I just used the words, let me know if you want any changes. But I think when I was talking to him, he just seemed like he was in a shock. And he said, okay, I'll get back to you. So I'm not one to, you know, push on people. I thought, okay, he says he's going to get back to me. And that's kind
So when was the action made about the recordings after you had told him? Was it 2 weeks later, 6 months later, a year later? When did this thing surface that the community was aware of the tapes?
I think I discussed it, the first time I brought it up to him was in March of 2011. And then he approached me in the hallway in December of 2011. And he, you know, had said, you know, those conversations that we had. And we'd had another conversation in August of some information that was on the recording system that I thought he needed to know about. And he says, you know those conversations that we had regarding the recording system? And I'm like, yes. And he's like, well, I need you to pull that for me. And we happened to be in the back hallway, and there were people walking back and forth, and so I didn't want to really say too much with people walking around. So I said, okay, is there anything that you're looking for in particular? You know, and he says, no, just, I think you know what I'm looking at, and I might have to talk to the mayor about it. Now, at that time, Mayor Lickey was still the mayor, so I wasn't quite sure if he meant Mayor Lickey or if he meant the incoming mayor, but I said, okay. And I made the comment that, well, you know, Chief, it's the end of the year, and I have all these reports that I have to do. And I said, they take me a while to get done, and, you know, we need it for the state of the city address and things like that, facts and figures and things like that. But I said, how soon do you need it? And he goes, well, just as soon as you can. And I go, okay, would it be okay if I just brought it to you in bits and pieces as I have time to go back? Because there were some things that I hadn't, I knew I would have to go back in my mind and remember, when did I hear that? When was that recorded? So I knew I was going to have to go back and, like, just go back and try to find the information. Because at that point, nothing had been pulled, nothing had been, you know, documented. So I knew I was going to have to start from fresh. So he said, well, just get it to me as soon as you can. And I said, would it be okay if I gave it to you in, you know, in pieces while I'm working on this other stuff? And he said, yeah, but I'm probably going to need it, you know, as soon as I can. So that's basically how I did it. I started, and I never got to complete what I wanted to provide because this investigation came on by the FBI.
So the new mayor is in position now. Licky's gone.
Right.
Buttigieg is in charge.
Right.
He gets the information.
Right.
And he comes to tell us about your interaction with him. How did you get fired? I know he demoted Daryl Boykins, Chief Boykins, but he fired you.
Yes. And that's, to me, it's very interesting because I feel like I'm the only person in the city that's ever been fired the way I was. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the Chief Boykins, after he had gone up to meet with the mayor, had actually, I believe, met with the mayor's assistant, Michael Schmuel, and Rich Hill, who was not an employee of the city, but he was the attorney that was guiding Mayor Buttigieg. And he called me and he goes, Karen, he goes, you don't have to do this. He says, but the mayor won't even talk to me. He won't let me speak to him. And he goes, I met with Schmuel and this man named Rich Hill. He goes, do you know who he is? I'm like, no, I've never heard of him. And he goes, well, they told me if I didn't, resign, that I was going to go to prison. And I was just shocked when I heard this. I knew
How would you go to prison? It seems like to me that you did some good here. You discovered some language, some culture, some stuff going on that would impact the city because it was impacting the chief of police.
Right.
But yet you're being fired because you revealed this information.
Right. I agree. I think that the spin that was being put on it was that it was wiretapping. And it's like, no, this is a phone line that was put on the recording system way before Chief Boykins ever became the chief. And so I didn't see it as wiretapping. I didn't see anything as wiretapping. This had been investigated by the captain of planning and research. It was set up under him. They knew that people moved from office to office. There was no policy as to placing anything on the phone saying, hey, this is a recorded line. The way it was explained to me over the years was we don't record people, we record positions. And that's because people would call in and maybe make an allegation against an officer. And they wanted to be able to have a recording of that. They wanted to be able to have recordings of talking with suspects and witnesses. And that's how it was explained, that they wanted certain positions. And because of the limitations on the equipment itself, you couldn't actually record every line within the police department. It just didn't have the capability to store or hold that much. So they had to make decisions. What are we going to record and what are we not going to record? And Chief Boykins never made any changes to the system. He kept it in place just as he had inherited it. Mm-hmm. People went to the FBI and formalized a complaint saying, we're being recorded. And I had them come to my house one evening and said they wanted to talk to me, and they started asking me questions. And the one FBI agent said, well, that's not what we were told. And I said, well, I don't know what you were told. I'm telling you how it's set up and how it's...
So they put somewhere along the line, they put a different spin on what you had...
Exactly.
What you had done, what you had seen, what you had captured from the recordings. There was a different spin that you were the bad guy.
Right. I'm the bad guy. I'm out to get them. And really my only thought in the whole thing was I was trying to protect my chief and other people that I felt this is wrong.
How did you take an attorney with you when you went to the mayor's office? Were you intimidated? You say there was a couple of attorneys there.
Yes.
It must have been and the mayor was there. It must have been very intimidating for you.
No, the mayor was not there.
He wasn't there.
No. What happened was Michael Schmuel had called me in my office and said, are you alone? I need to talk to you, and this is very sensitive. And I said, I'm aware it's sensitive. And he says, well, we need you to come up here. I need to talk to you about this. And I said, well, I'm not going to come up there and talk to you without an attorney. And he goes, okay, that's fine. And so I said, I'll need to get a hold of my attorney or what have you. In the meantime, they had already asked Chief Boykins to resign, and that's when Chief Boykins had called me and asked me, he said, you don't have to do this. He goes, but if you would please call the mayor's office and just explain to him what occurred. He says, he won't speak to me. And I said, sure, no problem with that.
But the judge wouldn't talk to...
Wouldn't speak to Chief Boykins.
Chief Boykins.
This is your chief, and you don't want to speak to your chief about what occurred. So I said, sure, I don't have a problem with that. And I called up there and I explained who I was and that I needed to talk to the mayor. I just want 10 minutes of his time. That's what I said. Just 10 minutes of his time. I want to explain what occurred. And they said, okay, we'll get back to you. Well, at the end of the day, nobody had gotten back to me. And then that's when Michael Schmuel had called me and said, listen, this is very sensitive and we need to talk to you about this. And I said, I know, but I'm not coming up there and talking to you without an attorney because, I had heard what Chief Boykins said, that they had made this threat about prison. And so my mind is just like whirling, like where did we get to this point? I met with the federal investigators and the U.S. District Attorney's Office and, was told I'm a witness to an investigation. So where did I all of a sudden become a person who's getting arrested, or the chief's getting arrested? It was said they received a complaint and they were investigating this complaint. So now I'm just like beside myself. I'm being, and I was quite hysterical. And so
So they gave you the ultimatum, either you resign or you're going to get fired.
Well, he didn't say that. He said, we need to discuss it with you at that time. And I said, well, I'm not going to discuss this without my attorney present. And he said, oh, yeah, that's fine. I said, well, you have to give me, some time to get my attorney present. And he's like, okay. So I call the U.S. District Attorney that I had spoken with through this investigation and left him a voicemail. And by this time, you can tell I'm crying and I'm upset. And I'm like, I had worked with this man before, and I found him to be a very dedicated, ethical man from my own, dealings. And when I kept asking him, am I in trouble? Have I done something wrong? And he kept saying, no, you're a witness in an investigation of some, complaints that we received. I'm like, okay, because I said, if I am in trouble, I hope that we have a good enough relationship that you would tell me if I need an attorney or not. I think that's only fair, And, he shook his head, no, I didn't need an attorney. So I'm taking this man at his word, and now I have, the mayor's office saying something completely different than what I'm hearing at the U.S. District Attorney's Office. So I'm confused, how is there such a variance of what's taking place? So anyways, it was maybe a Friday, I know it was April 12th, I got a call at the very end of the day from Michael Schmuel, and he said, we need you to come up here and we need to talk to you. And that's why I told you, I said, I won't come up there unless my attorney's present. And he goes, oh, we don't have a problem with that. And I said, okay, well, let me see if I can contact my attorney and get him up there. And so I called, and my attorney, Scott Beering, was in court in Stark County. So, that's what his secretary told me, and he wasn't available. So I called him back, and I said, well, listen, I can't come up there because he's not available. And he said, well, that's okay. This doesn't have anything to do with that. This is a personnel issue we need to discuss with you. So I'm like, okay, it's a personnel issue? And he said, yeah. So I go up there, and, it's the very end of the day. It's like 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock. And all of a sudden, interim Chief Hurley is there. And he'd only been the chief for like a week. And I knew him from when I first started working at the police department. He was the very first chief. And I'd always gotten along well with him. And I asked him, I said, Chief, do you have any idea what this is about? They told me it's about a personnel issue. And he looked at me and he says, no, I have no idea what this is about. That was a lie. So we sit down, and Michael Schmuel comes in, and then Rich Hill, who doesn't work for the city. Janice Hall, who was the human resources director, was nowhere. She was not invited to this meeting, and normally, if you were to fire a civilian, human resources is at least brought into the meeting, to go over paperwork or what have you. And she's nowhere. So I'm thinking, okay, she's not been included to the meeting. And so we're talking, and it was Rich Hill who said, as you know, there was an FBI investigation that took place. And as a result, we have asked Chief Boykins to step down. And that leaves us to the only other situation, and that is to ask you to resign. And I said, I'm not going to resign. And Michael Schmuel said, well, you had talked about it when I spoke to you on the phone. And I said, yes, if you recall. I said, I don't know, maybe I should resign. I don't want to work for people that, are accusing me of a crime. And I knew right then and there they wanted me to resign so they could make me look like I had done something wrong. And I was not about to resign because in my heart of hearts, I did nothing wrong. So I said, no, I'm not going to resign. And then this Rich Hill says to me, he said, well, you leave us no other choice but, to terminate you. So at this point, I'm laughing in my mind because I'm thinking, I'm being fired by somebody who doesn't even work for the city of South Bend. This is, an all new for me. And as I got up, I looked at Chief Hurley and I said, would it be okay if I could go back to my office and clear out my personal belongings? And he said, oh, yes. And then Michael Schmuel says, no, why don't you call in and arrange a time to come in? So I'm like, okay, fine. I don't have a problem with that. And as I got up, he said, now you do know, Karen, Schmuel said this, if you or anyone else talk about this, you could be indicted or what have you. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because that's not what the U.S. District's Attorney's Office said to me. So it's like, okay, someone is lying to me. Who is lying? Or who's, trying to manipulate or, make me feel like I should just go away and not be heard from. And I, thought to myself, they're just trying to keep this covered up. That's
when you were terminated, there has to be policies in place. There's got to be, you said the human resource person wasn't there. You have to have a handbook or something that shows the process,
right?
Due process of being terminated after 25 years. I mean, you just don't.
Exactly.
How did you see in your employee manual where you could have been fired just like at a drop of the hat like that? Did they follow protocol or did they omit stuff from your...
I didn't see any of the protocol followed. Usually you have to write things up and you present it to that person right then and there for them to read. They have the right to sign it or not sign it. There was nothing written up. There was, there was an investigation, and guess what? We're going to allow you to resign. That's what I was told. And I said, I know there was an investigation. I was part of it. And I was told I was a witness. And so, to me, it was like, okay, this is clearly, a way to intimidate me. They're trying, anyways, to intimidate me. I was very shocked that it was handled the way it was. Very unprofessional.
Was there any response from the mayor himself?
No, he never spoke to me, and he never spoke to Chief Boykins. And I can tell you, and I'm not being catty or mean, but as the director, I had to terminate many people. I always did it myself. I did not leave that up to somebody else. If we had to let somebody go, it was my job to tell them, okay, we've had this. The way it's done is you write disciplinaries, and there's a point system as to how many disciplinaries you would have within a certain amount of time, or if it was something really, really major, you could, you could bypass that and say, this is huge. This person, somebody died because of it, or what have you. But I had followed that for 14 years as the director, how to terminate somebody. It was not something I like to do, take somebody's livelihood from them. But some people just, for whatever reason, maybe they weren't the right person for the job.
Sure.
Maybe they were making numerous errors. But I always did it myself.
And when it come to you, it wasn't done
Right.
properly.
Right.
Let's fast forward a little bit and get to the point where when you filed a suit and you were awarded some cash, and there was a gag order put on you. Is there still a gag order on you?
We have a signed agreement, I guess you would say, that I would not talk about the case. And it also said in there I wouldn't talk about anything that happened while I was employed at the city of South Bend, which I find ridiculous because I talk about things all the time, maybe a call that I took as a dispatcher or what have you, and I don't see how that has anything to do with the matter at hand. But just the way I look at it was the first violation of that agreement was by the mayor himself when he wrote a book and discussed the case in the book. Clearly, some of the things that he said in there weren't factual. I've not read the whole book, but, I have had people I know read me excerpts of what was in there. It's been in the paper, and it's like, well, no, that's not exactly how it happened. And then also, besides that, the case that was filed against me by the officers and one of the officers' wives, what I found insane was they also sued my attorney for wiretapping. Now, how did my attorney have anything to do with wiretapping other than representing me? So he was named in my lawsuit. That was a way I felt, where they knew he was a very competent attorney and they were just trying to shut him down. So I said, and he brought it to me. He goes, ethically, I can't represent you if I'm named in the same lawsuit. So we said, okay. His wife, who's also an attorney, will be our attorney. We'll use Mari. And so I'm just looking at this and thinking to myself, really? This is how you think you're a victim and you try to sue someone's attorney, just as they tried to sue Councilman Davis for wiretapping, and that's all they had in there. And it's like, Councilman Davis didn't have anything to do with what took place. He simply sent a letter. He didn't name anybody, and he asked, for somebody to come in here and do some sort of an investigation on it. He didn't name anybody. As far as I know, maybe on their investigation they would find me a wrongdoing. He didn't know that. He didn't name anyone. He just said, I think an investigation should be done. So, okay, we're going to sue him. So is this just a way to silence people?
Do you feel that once your lawsuit was won, and you were exonerated from the FBI, that you could live a normal life? Do you feel that your life will forever be tainted, or forever have this cloud because of the tapes?
Of course. And first, I didn't win any suit. It was the officers that filed suit against myself and my attorney actually came to us and wanted to cancel cancel their lawsuit against us if we canceled our countersuit, which I had said to my attorney, fine, as long as we can write it. They're not writing up that. And my husband was against the idea. He goes, no. He goes, I think you should go all the way through. And at the time, I was just sad. And I was like, I just want this to end.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm tired of being drugged through the mud. And but I know that the reason that they wanted to do that was through their investigations, they found that one of the things in the lawsuit was an outrageous lie. And it had been proved it was a lie. That one of the people said, I told him, I was ordered to do this by Chief Boykins. It was then proved that that was a lie. People came forward and said, no, that didn't occur. So I could see why they wanted to, dismiss the lawsuit.
You have had some allies with you. Jack Stilp, I guess you're talking about there, that he came to vindicate and help you.
All Jack did was send me a Facebook message, and it said, "Hang in there, Karen. All the state ship guys are behind you." Well, he knew that I was very for the officers, and he was being supportive. And I think he was very supportive of Chief Boykins. He liked Chief Boykins, and because of that, he was, personally threatened. And that was not right. I mean, that was anger. I could see where they were angry towards him, like, "Oh, you're siding with her," But he was just being a friend and lending moral support. He hadn't done anything wrong just by lending moral support. I have friends that on Facebook are friends with myself, and they're also friends with some of these individuals.
Where did Officer Dieter fit in with this? Was he a ally? Was he a commandant? Did he give you encouragement along the way?
Yes, I believe he did. A lot of people did. Maybe from their own personal dealings within the system and what they had seen happened. But it wasn't like he and I ever spoke about what was going on. I think he just showed support. And I never spoke to him about what was on the recordings, or I didn't tell anybody about that.
Do you regret two things? Do you regret hearing the tapes, revealing the tapes, being the whistleblower behind the tapes? How has that, because that has impacted your life forever. Do you ever regret that, or?
I wish I had never heard them, but in my heart of hearts, I have searched my soul and said,
you'd have done it anyway.
I'd have done it anyway. And they've tried to make me, just like how certain people would try to make a rape victim feel like, okay, it's the rape victim's fault. They've tried to turn this around. When I say they, it's people involved that are trying to prohibit the tapes from being released. That, you were angry with all of them and vindictive because your husband got demoted. No, that had nothing to do with it. My husband's a grown man, and he speaks his mind, and sometimes it gets him in a lot of trouble. But that's just who he is, and he can fight his own fights. He's never needed me to, step in.
Do you regret going through the lawsuit and having that restriction of talking about the case? Do you
Yes.
do you regret?
Yes,
that?
I do regret that. And my husband he did try to talk me out of that. And I think it was just the mental state I was at the time. And I kept saying to him, I just want this to go away.
When is your book coming out?
I'm not doing a book.
You've got to.
I know people say that.
If others can do a book, certainly you can too, because your story will never be told in a half an hour interview.
Well, and that was the thing that I found the most, if you find humor out of something, was not only after the federal investigation, one of the retired officers had persuaded the local prosecutors to have the state come in and do a state investigation. And at that point, I just thought to myself, I wish I wouldn't have signed or, agreed to any sort of gag order. I should have just, on the very first day, put out what I heard, and then it would have all been done.
Do you have that put away, what you heard?
Yes.
The tapes may never be heard. They may be destroyed by now. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that?
I don't believe that they exist. I don't believe that they still exist at all. But I have no fact to prove that. But I would think that the federal court order that said that they were to be held by someone within the city, and then to find out later that the actual cassette tapes were in Chicago with a private law firm. I think people have to ask themselves these certain questions about this whole thing. Why was city legal not really brought into this at all, but kept on the outskirts, for the longest time? Why be secretive from your own city employees that handle legalities? To me, it was because there were things that they have tried desperately to hide. And I look at it as a mother, okay? If I find my child has done something wrong, and I come to them and say, hey, caught you with your hand in the cookie jar, what's the normal reaction for that child? Deny, deny, deny. Wasn't me. That's typical of kids. That's how I saw this. We will deny any wrongdoing. It's all on you type of thing. But how can you deny if you open it up and several other people are allowed to hear or witness?
There have been several council people that have fought for the tapes to be revealed, heard, listened to. That's still ongoing debate. There's been different people that have staged protests and press conferences on about the tapes. Mm-hmm. How does that make you feel? That there are still people that's out there trying to get the tapes heard, and an advocate for justice to be done on that. Mario being one of them, and Oliver Davis, the Councilman Oliver Davis, and Henry Davis is and of course Jesse, and a lot of people are trying to get that done. And how does that impact you? Because your name never comes up, just the tapes. But Karen's name never comes up.
Right, and it does impact me, and I do understand that reasoning. But I think the one thing that if I could impress on people is understand that this was a select group of people working on something of their own interest, for their own personal interest. And I really don't like it when people generalize. All officers are racist. All African Americans are criminals. That's generalizations. But the thing is that my experience hasn't been that within the police department. My personal experience is the vast majority of our police officers and our civilians are good people. But I have seen good people go in a very bad direction. If I could ask for one thing, I would ask that the people involved in this that are fighting so desperately to admit to themselves that they did, in fact, have an agenda. And it was based on the deadly sins, greed, hatred, ego, and to look themselves in the mirror and say, do I owe anyone an apology? They owe Chief Boykins an apology. I don't want an apology, but they do owe Chief Boykins an apology. And they need to look at themselves and say, what was my goal? Was I trying to benefit the community, or was I trying to benefit myself? Was I led by greed and hatred and a lust for power? Or, what were my intentions? And I think we're all can be loving and forgiving humans. I know Chief Boykins, if someone went to him and said, Chief, I've done you wrong, and I'm within my heart, I'm sorry for what I did.
If the tapes are destroyed, mm-hmm. How will we ever know the truth if you don't tell it?
Well, I have told the truth. And I have told it to...
You have told us a variation.
No, what I'm saying is they have my answers. They requested me to tell them what was on each and every tape, and I did provide that to not only the Mayor's Council, Edward Sullivan, but that was also provided to City Legal. So they had a copy.
It hasn't been revealed to public.
Right. But they have it. And
how would it ever get to public?
I don't know. I guess they'd have to request an access for public records, as it's not part of a criminal case. It was all considered civil. So I can't see why anyone would be denied. But I do know that the city has a history of redacting anything that they certainly feel they want to. So you might get, just humor it. Something very funny was when I got called in for a deposition, they gave me a copy of my own officer's report to Chief Boykins. And the entire thing was redacted, crossed out, except for my name, the date, and his name. And I thought that was funny because they said, do you recognize this? I said, yes. It's an officer's report that I gave the chief. I said, I have one at home that's not redacted. So, understand, I know exactly what's on it. I wrote it. And I know that redaction wasn't for me. That redaction was for other people. So they wouldn't see what I wrote.
If the public is ever going to know the truth, will it come from you?
I don't know how. I'm trying to abide by the rules, even though I think others have not abided by the rules, just as, they've spoke out several times. It's been on the news where I've seen people say things, or on radio. But I'm trying to do what I agreed to do. But yet, I hope that media would say, we just want an answer. We want to know what was there. And why won't you tell us? And you've got the mayor saying, well, I don't think I'm permitted to listen to it. Really? Who told you that? Who told you you're not permitted to listen to the tapes? Who told you no one's permitted? I've never heard that. Anyone say it's restricted. In fact, from the time that the FBI investigation started in January to when I was fired on April 12th, there were no restrictions at all by the FBI, by the state, by the prosecutor's office, by the mayor's office, they made no changes to that system. That line was still being recorded. And it's like, okay, if this is so illegal, how come nobody confiscated it? How come the tapes were returned to the mayor's office? Did they return them and say, oh, here you go, you can have these, but you can't listen to them? Mm. I just would like to see people just tell the truth. If he said, yeah, there's some things on there and it doesn't look very favorable to people that I care about, okay? That's an honest answer. I don't want it out there because it's going to make people that are my supporters look bad. That's an honest answer. But to say, oh, I don't think I can hear it.
I guess you're telling us a little bit about Mayor Pete Buttigieg's character, his commitment, and his courage. You display the character, the commitment, and the courage that he doesn't. What would you say as he's running for president and you see all of this facade that you've been witnessing and living through, and you see that he's running for the highest office there is, and you couldn't trust him in your position to come to you like a chief executive officer, and you've been there for 25 years serving our community, and he wouldn't even talk to you.
Right.
What's up with that?
Well, and the thing is, when this all started, my husband and I were very big supporters of his. We were both very excited to see someone young, innovative, with new ideas coming in. My husband even sent him a large contribution, which I don't like to get involved in that per se as much as he does. But, if you want to show your support, that's what you do. But I really felt, my first thought was that he was going to be blindsided, and that wasn't fair to him. I didn't think he had any clue what was going on. My opinion of that over 7 years has changed. So, do I find him to be sincere and genuine? No, I do not. Do I think that I would never vote for him for president? That's my personal opinion. There's people out there that love him. People that are friends of mine that work in the city that love him. That's their opinion. And I'm not going to try to sway them differently. If they want to sit down and talk about why I feel the way I do, that's one thing. But I just base it on a person's character and their sincerity, and I just don't see it.
Let's conclude by simply saying this to Miss Karen DePaepe. Thank you for coming. You've been very courageous. You've been very thorough. We could talk about this for another session. But there is hope at the end of the journey. There's light at the end of the tunnel, because there's a new mayor be taken over. And he did say on this radio station that he wants to hear the tapes. And so that should make you feel a little bit better if he's a man of his words, and you say that he can hear it and he can talk about it. Then that's his. That is what the people are requesting that he do to get this thing behind us. What do you say to people in your category that see wrongdoing, that could be a whistleblower, and they listen to you and say, I can't do that, 'cause, I can't blow no whistle, because the one in federal government with Trump, but the whistle, you're some courageous people.
But you
don't
think it all out.
You take some bad with that good. So what do you say to people that?
Well, you have to realize that it may come back to bite you. You may lose a job. You may be represented in a unfavorable light. It may turn that no one believes you. It's a personal conviction whether you want to come forward with something or not. I do happen to know of something that occurred within the city, just from knowing people, of an investigation that took place. And these employees, one of the employees was asked, if you knew this was wrong, why did you not come forward? And this person's answer was, because I need insurance and I needed salary to support my family. So that was a trade-off. Did that person think what was happening was, right? Absolutely not. But they knew it would cost them personally. And so that's just it's a decision each and every person has to make for themselves. I can't tell people what's in their best interest. I just happen to know that there were people I cared about that I felt.
You followed your conscience.
I guess that's how you could say it.
And you can rest well with that.
Right.
Final thing is, today there's a piece in the paper about the Logan family that tried to say that this corruption has not only been discovered by you, but it has continued to be a culture in the police department leading up to Eric Logan's death. So that culture, you say there's good people and there's bad people there. There's a culture there that sometimes it can be brutal and ugly. So when you saw that they tried to maybe get those tapes to be revealed, how did that make you feel when you read that?
Well, again, I'm very supportive of the police department. I have friends there that I've known for 30, 35 years, and to me it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges. These are different individuals and it's a different set of circumstances. And so, again, don't generalize. Oh, all officers are racist, or all officers have hateful attitudes. That is not the case. I think they are two separate issues. I try to look at it as I wasn't there, but I'm also a wife and a sister to retired officers. And I know that in my heart of hearts, it's please come home alive at the end of the day. I don't know what occurred during that shooting. I wasn't there. The facts haven't been presented. I understand that it's interesting that they want to come up with this point of, but don't you see, this is how it's always been. And that really isn't the case. I mean, I don't know what happened in that circumstance, but I would hope that people would keep an open mind and allow the process to work and see what's going on. I try to put myself in Eric Logan's shoes as a person that perhaps he was desperate and maybe he didn't want to go back to prison. I mean, you often hear suicide by cop. Okay, I don't know if that's the case. What I'm saying is, I wasn't there. I don't know if it even relates to what I dealt with. I wasn't a part of that. I can only answer for what I personally dealt with.
Final thing, and this is a promise. If you ever, by conscience, decide that you're going to tell the public, because if you don't tell it, it'll never be told. And you may not want to take it to the grave with you. If you ever decide to tell your story, I invite you to tell it right here on WUBS radio station.
Thank you, Reverend.
Would you do that?
I would do that.
Okay. All right. You heard that. You bring your recorder, Jesse, because she's going to tell it and you can get a piece of it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Reverend.
And have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
And a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Are you spending it in town?
Yes, I am. We're going to have a very, quiet family gathering.
Okay,
So
well,
that's the way I
good.
like it.
That's good. Listen, I wouldn't be a reverend if I didn't offer up a prayer. So let me just say a little prayer, and I'm gonna get out the way. Father God, I just thank you for this woman, because she's been on my heart. That's why she's here, and I spoke with Mario. Can we find her? Can we get her? Would she come? Would she tell and talk to our listeners? And she agreed to do that. She is a woman of character, of commitment, and of courage. Continue to bless her in a mighty way, God. Bless her family. And Lord, if she ever decides to blow the whistle again, let her blow it right here at 702 Lincoln Way West, WUBS radio station. God bless you now.
Thank you,
Thank
Reverend.
you.
God bless you.
All right. All right, we're going to continue with our regular scheduled programming. Thanks for tuning us in. Woo!
I hope that was okay.
Yeah, that was good.
I'll be waiting for hearing from Dan Pfeiffer. He'll be like, I'm going to sue you again. I'll bring it on. Cause,
Yeah.
And that is the thing, and my mind kind of tripped up. But the thing was, when they kept threatening with prison and stuff like that, I thought, why would you do that? Because if I did have to go to prison, I have nothing holding me back from telling you.
Yeah.
Very good.
What award? You get the Peabody Award, sir? Awesome job.
My.
Phenomenal.
Thank you.
Phenomenal.